Hello, and welcome to another edition of Behind the Numbers, the podcast that seeks the thought leaders in the fintech industry. So, before I dive into our very special guest today, I'd like to remind you that today's podcast is sponsored by Kinetic Core AI. They're a firm that help companies grow revenue within 12 months. So, if you're interested in a free growth consultancy, drop the word grow into the DMs and we'll take it from there. So, really pleased to have Boyd Davis, the CEO and founder of Payfederate, on the call today. Before we dive into his long and illustrious history, it's got some big players on there. We've got Accenture, we've got Intel's. Previous conversations with him, I really love the way that he's thinking about payroll, thinking about it as an asset, it's not a liability, and the way that we should be pivoting towards viewing that in that context. And he's bringing innovation, bringing AI to this particular space. So really excited to break it down in a bit more detail, get his view on the way AI is shaping that particular industry, but then equally, what challenges is he facing and what opportunities is he seeing in the market? So Boyd, welcome today and great to have you.
Well, thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
Wonderful. So give the listeners a bit of an overview of your potted history, where you've come from, where you've been, and, along the way, the sort of motivations that's driving you to where you are today.
I was just thinking about this. I wrote a blog post recently about, will AI kill SaaS? And I was thinking about my own career. I started in 1990, so I'll date myself. I know that seems like ancient history to many of your listeners, but that was kind of the height of the personal computer revolution, which kind of corresponded with the change in application architecture from what was quite centralized mainframe mini computer computing to client server. And then, shortly thereafter, we saw the rise of the internet, which is another major transition. It also changed application architecture. And then we saw a shift to mobility, which was massive. And then we saw a shift to big data that was invisible to many consumers, but was actually a precursor to almost everything that we see in large language models and AI. And now, of course, we're seeing a transformation with AI, more specifically large language models. I started my career at Intel as a young new college graduate, and Intel was a great place to have a bird's eye view of all of those transitions. And later in my career with Intel, I was deeply involved in particularly the emergence of data center technologies and distributed big data. It was only later in my career I decided to go from the core technology at Intel, and then I slowly kind of moved up the application stack and ended up doing what I'm always passionate about on technology. Is technology is just a means to an end, and they usually impacts human lives when it is applied. So I've always been more like, what can the technology do? And I ended up in working around how people get paid, which I think is a great honorable thing. There's a certain amount of human dignity in getting an honest day's pay for an honest day's work. And ultimately, that's what my software company does. We're trying to make sure organizations can pay their employees fairly. So that's my journey in a nutshell. I've seen all the big transitions, and I'm
Yeah.
excited to be on the front lines of this one.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, as I sort of said at the top of the call, you give the impression you're sort of an industry veteran on this. You've seen many of these paradigm shifts going on. So just to give us a bit of an insight on that, are there any common threads that you've seen through all of those shifts? Or would you say they're also fundamentally different? Is there any commonality there?
Well, I mean, they're all not the same scale. I think the emergence of the internet and the transition toward broad availability of large language models are the two massive ones, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that's not to diminish mobility or client server or big data, but there are some commonalities. One is denial, and I have lived through this. When you're an incumbent, successful player in a space, you tend to view the outcomes in the world as those that are favorable to you. And so one of the things you see is a degree of denial from legacy players. But you also see a lot of people co-opting an agenda without any real strategy, AI washing, kind of sprinkling AI pixie dust. You see the enormous amounts of that. But and ultimately, maybe the one thing that I'm most passionate about is we've always seen growth. And that's the thing that probably is a little bit unique about this one. There's probably more doomsday sayers about the impact of AI on humanity, on employment, on that kind of thing. I'm not there. And I go to there's one simple variable in the equation for technology, and that's the demand side of the equation is never sated. There is always a desire for humans to do more. So I look at all these people are saying your job's going to go away, and yet you talk to everybody working, and if they could be 10 times more productive, they would.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I'm a big believer in that as well. I know there's a lot of talk about AI is going to get rid of a load of jobs, but if you look at the job market since the 1930s, right, and that innovation since then, 70% of the jobs that we have now didn't exist in 1930. Along with that innovation comes changing jobs, changing roles. There's no limit to what in the amount of work that needs to be done in the world, is there? It's just it will just change and it will be done differently, right?
It'll
And it'll be
change.
done.
Well, and it's personal for me because I lived it, as I said. So I was responsible for the portion of Intel that builds chips for data centers. That's so and I oversaw the growth of that business from being quite fractional at Intel to being a major portion of their valuation. But at the time that I joined that organization, most servers in the world were probably used less than 10%, because you'd have to buy enough servers for whatever your peak capacity was. So the vast majority of the time, servers were used 1/10 of the value. And on top of that, we at Intel were driving a performance agenda with Moore's Law that was doubling performance every year. So when we saw the emergence of cloud computing has the potential to be much more efficient in the use of compute resources, and you could literally take server capacity up to close to 100%, giving you a X capacity improvement in a very short period of time. We were very worried at Intel that our business was going to suffer because you were going to deliver twice the performance and X the capacity. There's no way the market could possibly consume that without commoditizing. That was the conventional wisdom. And you fast forward, I left over 10 years ago, but fast forward now, and Intel is a fraction of what they once were. And NVIDIA, who created yet another discontinuity in terms of capability at a certain cost, they're worth 4 trillion. So there is an insatiable demand for advancement. Now, obviously, there's all amoral. Bad people can do bad things with really good technology. We've got to be cautious, but as an overall trend, I'm very optimistic.
Yeah, we're aligned on that one. So give us a bit of a breakdown of Payfederate then. What's the origins of it? Why did you construe the idea? Where are you at? And what's your role day to day within?
Yeah, so I'm the CEO and one of the co-founders of Payfederate. So I'm the business guy, and my co-founder is a smart guy. And we had met a few years ago and formed a company to do a slightly different portion of the compensation workflow. So in compensation, you have to first figure out what to pay people, and then every year you got to figure out how much of a raise to give them. We had built some software to figure out how to give raises out every year. Merit planning software, comp planning software is what that was called. And that's a little bit downstream because you're basically everybody has a pay, and you got to figure out what raise to give them. You're kind of that's further downstream from the decision. So we really realized the upstream effect was determining how do you pay competitively and consistently within a job architecture. So that's the software that we came up with. So the first observation was that you needed a more complete solution around how do you pay people. And then the second was this workflow has been around for decades, right? People buy surveys and use Excel to price out the jobs. This is an area that really could be dramatically transformed with AI. So our company is 3 years old, and we wanted to bring AI and modern approaches to figuring out how to get people paid fairly.
Excellent. Sounds very interesting. So in terms of you've been going 3 years, but what's your sort of vision for Payfederate? Where do you see it in 3 to 5 years?
Well, in even in mature markets like Western Europe and the United States, many people are not basing their employee pay on real data. They're kind of winging it. They look and see what's in the job ads, or they do word of mouth. So my vision is the labor market's the biggest market in the world, right? If you think about how much scrutiny and focus goes into something like the capital markets or real estate or something, the labor market's bigger. And yet most people don't make their investments and how much they pay people with very good insight. So our vision for the company is that we make fair pay far more universal by giving employers the tools to know what fair pay is. And part of it is to make organizations that are already doing this, make them more effective at it so they can do it better. But a big part of what we want to do is to allow a lot of organizations, people with 2, 3, 400 employees, give them access to the same capabilities that an IBM would have.
Very good. So, in terms of somebody, if they were interested in Payfederate, what in terms of the sell and the pitch and the outcome that you guys give is it's not necessarily a cost play, but it's your biggest asset is the payroll, your people. You need to manage it in the right way, and we give you the tools to be able to do that from a compensation perspective.
Yeah, you bring up you kind of steer me to a great point on a fintech podcast. This is really really well taken. Our colleagues in the financial functions of most employers are pretty sophisticated in understanding the business impact of a decision, right? So that's the whole nature of financial services. In the HR world, we have a little bit of a ways to go because part of the problem is this: what's the return on investment if you invest in a solution like Payfederate? The way you really need to think about it is what is the business outcome you're trying to achieve? And unfortunately, a lot of people in HR, they talk about compa ratio or range penetration or these kind of wonkish terms. And what business leaders want to hear about is revenue growth, profitability. Where I start is I'm a CEO. I've been in executive management for a while now. And I think the way most executives think was, how does this impact my business? So I want to make sure our customers who are by and large HR comp people have the ability to talk about how the tools work. Because you're right. What it goes to is if your people leave or stay in a job for three reasons. This has been true forever. They hate their boss, they don't feel like they're paid fairly, or they don't feel like they have a future. That's it. Those are the three reasons why people leave. Payfederate doesn't do very much about whether you hate your boss or not. That, manager development is really, really, really important. But in terms of whether or not you feel like you have a future and whether or not you're paid fairly, we can hit to the square of that, right? So then you get to, that this is why people are engaged and they stay. So ultimately, an investment in Payfederate to pay people, not only pay them fairly, but be able to communicate to them so that they know they're being paid fairly. It goes to the core of retention, engagement, productivity, and ultimately profit and revenue. I mean, it's if you don't link back to, and by the way, I will caveat that we serve a lot of mission-driven organizations who don't care at all about revenue and profit, but just substitute whatever the mission is: educating students, feeding the poor, but it's performance relative to the mission.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. So, in terms of how you deploy this in an organization, is this a SaaS product, or would it be deployed on premise? How do you set up, or have you got options?
Oh, that's fascinating. I don't know if I've been asked an on-premise question for a number of years. With the latest story being that SaaS itself is dead because it's going to get replaced by AI vibe coding. No, we're a SaaS offering in the cloud, and I think one interesting thing about us is, as I talk about democratizing this capability to smaller organizations. For many of them, it's not just a tools and data issue; it's an expertise issue. So one of the things we do is to empower a broad range of consultants who can actually do this work for you. I think of compensation as a little bit like for a smaller organization accounting. I don't have my own accountants at Payfederate, right? We hire an agency to go do that, but they use our general ledger software, and I get access to it all the time. It's the same thing. I don't need to be an expert in accounting, but I need access to my systems. It's the same kind of thing that with Payfederate, you can get an expert to set up what your pay is, but you still have visibility to it. And that's a unique element of what we're trying to do, because it really is, how do we get to a point where the reason somebody's paid what they're paid is objective and fair?
And that's an honourable pursuit in any line of work. So yeah, good stuff. So next 12 and 18 months, what does that look like for you guys? What are the type of outcomes or objectives you're trying to get to?
Well, it's interesting. G2 is emerging it has for some years is the Bible of software reviews and kind of references. And we just in the spring report were awarded a high performer, which the consultants all love quadrants, right? And the high performer is people with a high degree of customer satisfaction but less market presence. And I was very proud of that because we're not trying to be the biggest. I don't think you can build a software business the same way. I don't think you can go out and get an MVP and hire 5 SDRs and go badger the streets and win your first 8 deals and try to scale it. The demands of the customers are much higher. The scrutiny is much higher. So, I think that, we are building a lean product focused kind of company that can thrive in the modern era. I'd hate to be sitting with a huge payroll for a bunch of sales and marketing burden to badger customers because it's just not working anymore. So within the next 12 to 18 months, that customer satisfaction, our product leadership, will take us from less market penetration up into to being a meaningful market player. To achieve what we want to achieve, we have to get a degree of scale, right? Because we want to impact the labor market. And I won't be so ambitious to say we can affect the global labor market yet, but certainly in the markets that we serve, starting with the United States, we'll hope to have a good impact.
No doubt you will. It sounds like a great product. Quite excited to see the future, what it holds for you guys, actually. So, yes, um, you've talked about where you want to be in 18 months, and you've sort of touched on a few of the challenges there. Are there any other sort of headwinds that you need to get over if you want to get to where you want to in the next 18 to 24 months? That could be macro and microscopic.
Yeah, I tend to, I mean, obviously the global macroeconomic environment, the global geopolitical environment always is a factor. It's one of the things that it's a benefit of perspective. I think that these things all come and go, and they actually end up never really impacting the broad market. Pockets, there are people that are dramatically affected. But I think there's a couple. One is the uncertainty around AI. Is a headwind in the sense that in certain circles you'd believe that 70% of white collar professionals are vibe coding their job in Claude, and there's going to be this dramatic shift in the world. And then I talk to clients who are like, yeah, we have this minor thing and we're scheduling it for second half 27, right? I mean, enterprises are still behaving like enterprises do, but it's stalling things. Investors are skittish because they all think in extremes, and many companies are hesitant to do something because they're afraid that something better might come along. So there's a little bit of this AI hesitancy that's out there, and it's reminiscent of the early days of the internet. To me, is most familiar. I don't know if you saw people scrambling to put up a website, and that took HTML coding and all that. But I think that the second one is the attention span. How do you reach customers, right? And this is it's the great game, right? Every I think that over the last 10 years, we've had a lot of marketers that have gotten lazy. And by that, I mean, you could chase a new tactic. So there's always the new tactic of the day. Okay. You can get direct onto somebody's calendar. You can use an SMS. You can, like, the vehicles, the way you reached people, right? And in all of the dynamic nature of human communication over the past 10 or 20 years, there's always been a new angle that you could sneak in, right, to get to somebody. And for a while they work great. And we've seen them, all the LinkedIn scrapers that boomed, right? And now it's a constant battle with LinkedIn, and the marketers and the customers are just getting spammed, right? So I think what you have to go back to is authenticity and messaging. I'm an old school marketing guy. It's the message, the audience, and the media. And the marketing world has gotten really enthralled with media. Like, what's the way to get to them? You have whole structures built up around industries that are focused only on manipulating the media, SEO, or now you have the search or the language model optimization. At the end, I think what's winning is you connect with a specific client about a problem that they have, and they find you. And all of the push in the world, it's less and less effective. So people spend more money to get the same outcome. So by spending more money, they flood the airwaves with even more slop, making it even more expensive to get through. Authenticity is the only thing that wins. But authenticity is hard because you have to find a place where your target customer is willing to expose themselves to your authenticity. So it's still hard. That's the other big one, I'd say. That's a difficult plan. If
Makes
somebody on
sense.
your podcast listening has a solution to that, you can send me an email, boyd@payfederate.ai. I'll respond to your cold outreach if you solve that problem. But
Yeah.
please don't send me an email saying you're going to book 10 meetings for me.
Okay. Great. Right. So obviously one of the things that your software is supporting is like talent and retention, etc. Tell me about how you are able to nurture your talent. How easy is it to access the people that you need in the current market? Are you able to do that on your home turf, or you're having to go abroad? What's that all looking like for you at the moment?
It's an interesting strategy, interesting question. I rarely think about my company that way just because we're quite small. I mean, I think when we went into it, we had a core of people that we'd worked with before. That's a very traditional startup story. Half of the company worked for us at our previous startup. And so it's I hate to use the term family in a company because I think it's overused. It's not accurate, and oftentimes is used as a way to mask toxic behavior. So it's not a family, but it is a very tight knit group of professionals that are tied to each other. So our fate is tied to one another. So no, I haven't seen that yet. We also have a dual geography strategy. We have a footprint in India and a footprint in the United States. So that gives us a little bit of an ability to arbitrage those two labor markets because they're really good for different things.
Yeah, absolutely. Interesting. Okay. Global expansion then. That's good. Excellent. Okay. So it's been a really great conversation. I always ask a guest this one question, but what one piece of advice would you have given the 18-year-old Boyd, which would have stood him in good stead for his career in technology?
That is, my mind probably leaps immediately to something flip and not very helpful because it to me is if somebody is asking that question, they're probably a young person looking for some sort of insight, and I would try to tailor the kind of answer to them. I look back on my life and I don't have I've done a lot of horrible, disastrous things and made unquestionably mistakes, but I wouldn't change a single thing. So, be healthy, take care of your health. When you're 18, it seems like, you're invincible. You can do anything. You can eat whatever you want, drink whatever you want, never gain weight. That's the biggest one. It's a long game. It's a marathon and it is a game in the end. So 18-year-old me, I would say enjoy the ride, take care of your body first, take care of your family and enjoy it. And then if somebody wanted advice on how to play the game, I'm happy to do that, but none of that really matters. What really matters is your health and your family.
I think that's very sage advice, Boyd. You've had a star-studded career. You've worked at some massive organizations, and now you're trying to, change the way that payroll is managed and people get paid, which is a really honorable thing. Because at the end of the day, that's one of the most important things to people. Like you said, taking home an honest paycheck for an honest day's work. So I think you're going to do some good in the world. I'm really looking forward to seeing what happens with Payfederate. I think the model looks great. And I think in the course of time, you will continue to expand and grow and be hugely successful. If people want to find out a bit more about yourself and also Payfederate, where do they need to go?
And again, my email is just boyd@payfederate.ai. And, um,
Keep it simple.
yeah. So, and if somebody out there is interested, love to talk to comp consultants, because we can be a good partner in your business. And if you're a business leader and you struggling with retention or hiring, or you feel like you're just not competitive, drop me a line. I can point you in the right direction.
Boyd, I probably can talk to you all day. You've got a wealth of insight. It's great conversation, but we'll have to draw a
All
line
right.
under
Thanks
it.
a lot, Matt.
But awesome. And so, everyone, if you want to follow and subscribe to the channel, you can follow that on LinkedIn and also on YouTube. And until next time, thank you very much.
All right.